Before we begin, I'd like to ask you a question. What do you think is the most complex thing in the universe? A supercomputer? Maybe a calculus test? How about a B-50 bomber? Unfortunately, if you answered any of these, or anything similar, you're incorrect. The answer is in your head.
Hi, I'm Janelle Cranston.
And I'm Homera.
Now, I'm sure you've all heard of the brain. Each and every one of you have one. But what is it exactly? The brain is an organ that makes up the center of the nervous system. This means that the brain is responsible for movement, sleep, thirst, hunger, and virtually every other vital task that you need to survive.
In order to fully understand the basic anatomy and function of the human brain, join us in our documentary, The Human Brain, The Inside Story. Let's begin. The central nervous system is made up of two types of tissue, the gray matter and the white matter. The gray matter is mainly composed of neuronal cell bodies and unmyelinated axons. Axons are the processes that extend from neuronal cell bodies, carrying signals between those bodies. These axons' lack of melanin, a protein, determine the brownish-gray color of the gray matter. The gray matter serves to process information in the brain, especially the surface of the brain. Structures within the gray matter process signals generated in the sensory organs or other areas of the gray matter. The tissue directs motor stimuli to nerve cells in the central nervous system where synapses induce a response to these stimuli. White matter, on the other hand, is in the deep core of the brain and is mainly composed of long-range myelinated axons that transmit signals to the gray matter. Melanin forms a protective coating around these axons, insulating them and improving their transmission of the signals. The melanin also determines their whitish color. White matter is found buried in the inner layer of the brain's cortex, while gray matter is mainly located on the surface of the brain. The spinal cord is arranged in the opposite way, with gray matter found in the core and white matter found insulating and wrapped around the outside. Like any good coach would say, the fundamentals are key. The same is true for the human brain. The human brain is home to more than 86 billion neurons. Neurons are nerve cells that transmit information to each other and are the building blocks of the central nervous system. Neurons send and receive neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the chemical electrical signals, like dopamine, which incites pleasure for evolutionary advantageous actions, like reproducing or eating food. These signals are sent through spaces between neurons called synapses. There are also receptors that are places on neurons where they receive this information. Depending on whether the neurotransmitter is chemical or electrical, the synapses will work uniquely to allow the neurons to send these messages to other neurons and eventually through the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, or nerves all across your body that control your senses. Major controversy of the microscopic parts of the human brain involve brain death. Brain death is the occurrence when neurons cease to function and neurotransmitters are not sent, thus causing the body to not function on its own. The only way any organ systems function in a brain-dead individual is through the help of life support devices such as ventilators. A major misconception is that brain-dead people can come back. However, the medical community advocates the opposite. In fact, the only difference between a brain-dead person and a fully dead person is that the brain-dead person's organ systems can be supported by life support machines. Through communicating this fact, the medical community attempts to open the opportunity for families to stop life support and donate their deceased loved ones' organs.
If you would split the brain right down the middle into two symmetrical or equal parts, you would have a right and left hemisphere. Although equal in size, these two sides are not the same and do not carry out the same functions. The left side of the brain is responsible for controlling the right side of the body. It also performs tasks that have to do with logic, such as in science and mathematics. On the other hand, the right hemisphere coordinates the left side of the body and performs tasks that have to do with creativity and the arts. Both hemispheres are connected by the corpus callosum and serve the body in different ways.
Ever solve a tricky math problem? You can thank the frontal lobe for that. The frontal lobe is located in the upper part of the cerebral cortex, or the part that has to do with higher functionality. You use your frontal lobe nearly every day. You use it to make decisions, such as what to eat or drink for breakfast, as well as thinking or studying for a test. The frontal lobe is where our personality is formed and where we can carry out higher mental processes like planning. In addition, the frontal lobe is necessary to be able to speak fluently and meaningfully. The major controversy surrounding the frontal lobe of the human brain involve lobotomies and luectomies. Lobotomies and luectomies are forms of psychosurgery which attempt to cure or treat neurological illnesses by severing connections between the prefrontal lobe and the rest of the brain. In theory, this should limit the amount of neurotransmitters released associated with these ailments. Its inception was in 1935 by Dr. Egas Moniz, a Portuguese doctor. He won the Nobel Prize in Physiology in 1949 for this discovery. However, it has always been controversial. In fact, it was so controversial in the Soviet Union that the country banned it as early as 1950. The process involves a needle inserted through the patient's head and then hammered down to sever neural connections between the prefrontal lobe and the rest of the brain. It remains controversial today, but is not used nearly as often except for in undeveloped nations. Since the 1970s, it has been replaced by antipsychotic meds called neuroleptics, which attempt to treat the disorder but can also cause cognitive dulling. Some examples are Thorazine and Haldol.
The temporal lobe is located in the bottom middle part of the cerebral cortex right behind the temples. The temporal lobe mainly revolves around hearing and selective listening. It receives sensory information such as sounds and speech from the ears. It is also key to being able to comprehend or understand meaningful speech. In fact, we would not be able to understand someone talking to us if it wasn't for the temporal lobe. This lobe is special because it makes sense of all the different sounds and pitches being transmitted from the sensory receptors of the ears. The parietal lobe is located in the upper back part of the cerebral cortex. The parietal lobe carries out some very specific functions. As a part of the cortex, it has a lot of responsibilities and has to be able to process sensory information within seconds. The parietal lobe is where information such as taste, temperature, and touch are integrated or processed. Humans would not be able to feel sensations of touch if the parietal lobe was damaged. Do you enjoy watching TV or reading a book? Without the occipital lobe, you wouldn't be able to do any of these things. The occipital lobe is located in the bottom back part of the cerebral cortex, and the occipital lobe is also important to being able to correctly understand what your eyes are seeing. These lobes have to be very fast to process the rapid information that our eyes are sending. Similar to how the temporal lobe makes sense of auditory information, the occipital lobe makes sense of visual information so that we are able to understand it. If our occipital lobe was impaired or injured, we would not be able to correctly process visual signals, thus visual confusion would result. In order to gain a more full understanding of the human brain, we sat down with our AP Biology teacher, Mr. William Bonnet. I'm in the Shiloh High School AP Biology lab talking to the AP Biology teacher, Mr. William Bonnet. Today I'll be asking you a couple questions about the brain.
Okay.
What do you think is the most fascinating thing about the human brain?
Most fascinating thing about the brain is that basically it controls every aspect of the body. Every organ that we depend on, every process, homeostasis, the maintenance of an internal environment, all of that either directly or indirectly goes back to the brain.
Thank you. Why do you think that the brain is the most important organ in the body?
Yes,
so, why?
absolutely. In fact, usually when you ask this to the general population, you usually get two answers. They either say the brain or the heart. And I side with the brain because the heart is very important. It does a lot of things. It transports the nutrients, oxygen that we breathe to all our tissues. But guess what controls the heart? It's the brain, right? So the brain and its electrical activity actually controls the workings of the heart. So although the heart's important, I would say that the brain is by far the most important organ.
Can you list a couple of the things that it does that makes it different than any other organ, that makes it more important?
Okay.
Maybe some other things and how it runs.
Okay, sure. Well, the brain runs basically, it's two parts. It's made up of neurons, and it has chemical and electrical signals that it uses. It uses chemical signals, and it has little gaps inside of it called synapses, and it makes up the central nervous system. It uses those signals to basically send messages to other parts of the body. Now we, as you know, we're vertebrates. We have a spinal cord. And so it sends those messages through the spinal cord and then out to the peripheral nervous system, to the organs. None of the other organs are capable of doing that. There are other organs that use chemical messengers, but not neurons like the brain does.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your time. This is, once again, Mehul Mehra Reporting from the Shiloh High School EB Biology Lab. Join me later for further discovery of the human brain.
The brainstem is located at the juncture of the cerebrum and the spinal column. It is anterior to the cerebellum. The brainstem is the region of the brain that connects the cerebrum with the spinal cord. It consists of the midbrain, medulla oblongata, and the pons. Motor and sensory neurons travel through the brainstem, allowing for the relay of signals between the brain and the spinal cord. The brainstem coordinates motor control signals sent from the brain to the body. The brainstem also controls life-supporting autonomic functions of the peripheral nervous systems. The brainstem controls several important functions of the body, including alertness, arousal, breathing, blood pressure, digestion, heart rate, and also relays information between the peripheral nerves and spinal cord to the upper parts of the brain. The cerebellum is located in the lower area of the brain below the pons. The cerebellum is one of the most identifiable parts of the brain due to its unique shape and location. It is extremely important for being able to perform everyday voluntary tasks such as walking and writing. It is also essential to being able to stay balanced and upright. Patients who have suffered from damaged cerebellums often struggle with keeping their balance and maintaining proper muscle coordination. The medulla oblongata is located in the lower part of the brainstem. The medulla is easily the most important part of the brain because its functions are involuntary or done without thought. We would not be able to live without the medulla because of the myriad of crucial tasks it performs, including regulating blood pressure and heart rate, breathing, and swallowing. As a part of the brainstem, it also helps transfer neural messages from the brain to the spinal cord. During brain surgery, a surgeon has to be extremely cautious or careful not to damage any part of the medulla. Although damage to other parts of the brain can be dealt with accordingly, damage to the medulla is the hardest to fix because of the many important functions that it carries out. The pons is the area of the hindbrain that sits directly above the medulla. The pons serves as a message station between several areas of the brain. It helps relay messages from the cortex and the cerebellum. Without the pons, the brain would not be able to function because messages would not be able to be transmitted or passed along. It also plays a key role in sleeping and dreaming, where REM sleep, or the sleeping state where dreaming is most likely to occur, has been proven to originate here in the pons. The midbrain is the smallest region of the brain that acts as a sort of relay station for auditory and visual information. The midbrain controls many important functions such as the visual and auditory systems as well as eye movement. The amygdala is part of the limbic system at the end of the hippocampus. When you think of amygdala, you should think of one word: fear. The amygdala is the reason we are afraid of things outside our control. It also controls the way we react to certain stimuli or an event that causes an emotion that we see as potentially threatening or dangerous. Numerous studies have been performed where researchers have used deep lesioning, which is a procedure where a thin wire is inserted into the brain to remove or terminate a part of the brain, and they used this procedure to remove the amygdala of rats. After this procedure, the rats were said to have no fear of anything, even cats. The removal of the amygdala had taken away the rat's memory of fear, therefore the rats did not fear anything. The hippocampus is part of the limbic system in each temporal lobe. The hippocampus has a unique shape similar to that of a horseshoe. It not only assists with the storage of long-term memories, but it is also responsible for the memory of the location of objects or people. We would not be able to even remember where our house is without the work of the hippocampus. Alzheimer's disease, which is a disease that affects elderly people and often results in memory loss, has been proven to have affected and damaged this area of the brain. The corpus callosum is located above the thalamus under the cerebral cortex. The corpus callosum is the part of the mind that allows communication between the two hemispheres of the brain. It is responsible for transmitting neural messages between both the right and the left hemispheres. Dr. Roger Sperry, a neuroscientist and former Nobel Prize winner, is famous for performing split-brain research on patients with surgically cut corpus callosums. His discoveries further proved the theories that the right and left hemispheres did indeed have different functions. The thalamus is part of the forebrain below the corpus callosum. The thalamus is similar to a doctor that diagnoses or identifies a patient's disease or sickness. It diagnoses different sensory information that is being transmitted to the brain, including auditory, visual, tactile, and gustatory signals. After that, it directs the sensory information to the different parts and lobes of the cortex. If this part of the brain is damaged, all sensory information would not be processed and sensory confusion would result. The hypothalamus is located above the pituitary gland and below the thalamus. It is responsible for behaviors such as hunger and thirst as well as the maintenance of body temperature. This allows the body to maintain homeostasis.
This concludes our documentary about the basic anatomy of the human brain.
If you would like further information, please check our Works Cited page or other resources.
We'd like to thank you for watching, and we hope you learned something useful throughout this program. My name is Mehul Mehra.
And I'm Janelle Cranston.
And this has been The Human Brain, The Inside Story.